You didn't lose them. But tell that to the part of you that still can't breathe at night. Tell that to the memories that still replay like they meant something. Tell that to your nervous system that keeps waking up in panic, searching for a presence that was never really safe to begin with. The pain is real, but the person you're grieving isn't. Not entirely. Because what you lost was a projection, a fantasy, a beautifully constructed illusion, tailored to your wounds. And that's what makes it hurt so much. Because it wasn't just a person you lost, it was the story you told yourself about them. About you. About what it all meant. They mirrored your dreams, reflected your hopes, listened not to understand, but to collect data. They paid attention, not to love you, but to learn how to wear the perfect mask. They studied your voice, your fears, your history, and then became exactly what your abandonment wounds were starving for. It felt like being seen. It felt like being chosen. It felt like love. But it wasn't. Because real love doesn't evaporate the moment you have a need. Real love doesn't make you doubt your sanity. Real love doesn't disappear when you set a boundary. They were never who you were loving. You were loving the version they projected. You were loving the illusion. And now that they're gone, or worse, now that they've replaced you in a heartbeat, you're left questioning your worth, your memory, your voice. But this pain, it's not proof that they were real. It's proof that you were. Because you loved with honesty. You opened up without strategy. You believed in something that felt divine. Because your soul was ready for connection. And that's what narcissists exploit. They don't just prey on weakness. They prey on purity, on your longing to be loved with depth, on your belief that people mean what they say, on your hunger for something true in a world that feels increasingly fake. So when they leave cold, abrupt, indifferent, you don't just lose the relationship. You lose your anchor to reality. You question your value. You relive every word, every moment, trying to find where it went wrong. But it didn't go wrong. It went exactly as designed. Because from the beginning, you weren't being loved. You were being profiled. Your smile was scanned for compliance. Your silence measured for control. Your traumas, not held but harvested. And the moment you started waking up, the illusion had to die. Because it can only survive while you're asleep. So yes, you cry, you break, you spiral. But please understand, you didn't lose someone real. You lost someone strategic. And that's what hurts most. Because deep down, you were never just grieving them. You were grieving who you thought you could finally become beside them. You believed they were your safe place, but they were the architect of your confusion. You thought they were your beginning, but they were your biggest mirror. Not of love, but of everything you needed to heal. There's a reason it still haunts you, even after they're gone. Because what they gave you wasn't just affection. It was a script, a role, a version of yourself that felt finally seen, even if it wasn't real. And when that version collapsed, so did your sense of identity. You didn't just lose them. You lost who you became around them. The softness, the hope, the dream of finally being enough for someone who didn't flinch at your darkness. That illusion felt like redemption, like healing, like home. But it was a performance, and you were never told the script would end. That one day they'd flip the narrative, turn your kindness into weakness, your vulnerability into ammunition, your trust into a weapon. And still, you stayed. Because love bombing isn't just about grand gesture. It's about psychological hooks, emotional addiction, the high of being chosen, the crash of being discarded, the chase to win back what was never stable to begin with. And that cycle doesn't end when they leave. It lingers, in your chest, in your sleep, in the way you now flinch at kindness, wondering if it comes with strings. Because after someone gives you a fairy tale, then punishes you for believing it, nothing feels safe anymore. You start over-analyzing your emotions, questioning your instinct, replaying moments where you should have known. But here's the truth. You didn't stay because you were naive. You stayed because you were loyal to the vision, because you saw the potential, because your heart believed love could heal. And they saw that. They banked on it. They built their control around it. Because people like them don't want equals. They want mirrors, reflective surfaces that admire but never challenge. And the moment you started growing, the mirror cracked, the illusion broke, and that's when the discard began. Subtle at first. Less texts, colder eyes, backhanded compliments, then silence, withdrawal, replacement. It wasn't random, it was tactical. Narcissists don't drift away, they phase you out strategically, while making you think it was your fault, that you changed, that you were too emotional, too distant, too much. But you weren't too much, you were becoming aware, and awareness is dangerous to people who rely on your confusion to stay in control. So now, every time you feel the pull to go back, remind yourself, you're not missing love, you're missing relief. Relief from the craving, relief from the chaos, relief from the addiction they engineered. That's not love, that's dependency, that's trauma disguised as connection, and breaking it feels like withdrawal, not because they were your soulmate, but because they were your supplier of hope, of validation, of just enough attention to keep you tied. But you're waking up now, slowly, painfully, but clearly, and that clarity, it's not cold, it's not cruel, it's freedom, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. They never apologized the way you need it, because to apologize is to admit there was harm, and narcissists don't admit to causing harm. They rewrite it, blur it, make you question if it ever happened at all, so you're left apologizing to yourself, for staying, for hoping, for bending into shapes that hurt just to feel worthy. But the truth is, you were trained, not overtly, not with threats, but with subtleties, glances, silences, with the slow erosion of your confidence. The manipulation wasn't loud. It was surgical. One missed call followed by blame, one vulnerable moment, followed by distance, one cry for connection followed by punishment. They didn't yell, they withdrew, they didn't insult, they joked, they didn't betray, they forgot. But every little cut added up, and before you realized it, you were bleeding, internally, in ways no one could see. That's what makes emotional abuse so devastating. It leaves no bruises, just confusion, and confusion makes you quiet, makes you isolate, makes you believe that maybe it is your fault, maybe you are too needy, maybe you do overreact, and in that fog they thrive. Because now you're apologizing for having feelings, for asking for time, for needing anything at all, until your needs disappear, and all that's left is performance. Smiles that don't reach your eyes, laughter that feels rehearsed, silence that screams louder than any fight ever could. They trained you to shrink, to edit yourself, to become digestible, and they called it love, but it wasn't. It was consumption. You weren't being loved, you were being used, for supply, for control, for the pleasure of watching someone ache just to stay close. And still, you wonder if they ever loved you. But love doesn't look like silence when you cry. It doesn't look like distance when you're scared. It doesn't look like punishment when you speak your truth. So maybe it's time to stop asking if they loved you and start asking why you had to suffer to feel loved. Because that's not love, that's programming, and you're allowed to unlearn it. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to stop explaining, to stop performing, to stop breaking yourself, to fit inside someone else's comfort. The day you stop explaining is the day you start healing. You still wonder if it was all your fault, because that's what they planted in you. Doubt, subtle, persistent, corrosive doubt, not with direct blame, but with implications, with sighs, with silence, with the way they looked at you like you were difficult, fragile, too much. And slowly, you started agreeing, not because you believed it deep down, but because it was easier than constantly defending your reality. That's how emotional erosion works. It's not an explosion, it's a quiet day by day, moment by moment, until one day you're no longer sure what's real, what you felt, what you need. You shrink, you accommodate, you lose your edges, and then your shape. And when you disappear, they say they say they miss the old you, the one who didn't start fights, the one who didn't question, the one who was easier to manage. But the old you wasn't real. It was a survival mask, a version of yourself that chose safety over truth. And now that the mask is slipping, they panic, not because they love you, but because they're losing control. That's what narcissists mourn. Not your presence, but their power over it. And that's why the discard feels so cruel. It's not just rejection, it's a cold confirmation that you were only safe as long as you stayed small. The moment you grew, asked questions, needed clarity, expressed pain, you became inconvenient, and inconvenient people get erased, ghosted, replaced, blamed, not because of who they are, but because of what they represent. Truth. And truth destabilizes narcissistic systems. So when you look back, try to remember this. It wasn't your fault. Your pain was real. Your questions were valid. Your boundaries were necessary. The problem wasn't your emotional depth. It was their inability to meet you there. You didn't ruin anything. You revealed it. And revelation is always met with resistance. So let that be your closure, not their words, not their silence, but your clarity, your return to self. Because sometimes the only apology you'll ever get is the one you give yourself. You kept hoping they'd come back different, softer, more present, more aware of how they hurt you, but they didn't. They came back with charm, not change, with promises, not apologies, with the same mask, just polished. And for a moment, you almost believed it, because hope doesn't die easily, especially when it's tied to a version of love you desperately needed to be real. So you gave them another chance, and another, and one more after that, not because you were weak, but because your heart still believed in their potential. But potential is not a promise, and love without action is manipulation. They knew what to say, what to wear, when to touch, how to trigger nostalgia. They weren't coming back to heal you. They were coming back to reset the cycle, because a healed version of you is dangerous. A version of you that no longer needs them is useless to them. So they tested you, with breadcrumbs, with mixed signals, with half-truths, dressed as transparency. And when you started pulling away, they got louder, more dramatic, more desperate. Not for you, but for your compliance, for your silence, for your return to self-abandonment. Because that's what the relationship required. Your absence, your submission, your emotional hunger. And when that version of you died, so did their interest. That's the truth that cuts the deepest. Not that they left, but that the person you became for them was never enough to make them stay. Because it was never about love, it was about control. And once you stopped being a puppet, the performance ended. So don't blame yourself for the hope. That hope was your humanity. But don't go back to the illusion. You've outgrown the stage. You've remembered your voice. And no matter how loud the silence feels now, it's still better than living on mute. There's a strange kind of grief that comes with healing. Not because you miss the person, but because you miss who you thought you were becoming with them. You miss the dream, the version of your life that felt finally full, finally enough. But healing means letting go of illusions, not just people. And that's the hardest part. Because the illusion was beautiful. You believed in a connection that felt faded, a bond that felt deeper than words. But now you see it for what it was. Chemistry built on chaos, affection that came with a price. And you were the one paying it, with your peace, your confidence, your sense of self. And still, you stayed, because it wasn't all bad. There were moments, real or not, that felt like love. And those moments kept you tethered, hoping, bargaining, trying harder, giving more, until you had nothing left to give. That's what breaks you. Not the betrayal, not the discard, but the realization that you gave everything. And they treated it like nothing, that you offered your soul, and they responded with silence, or worse, indifferent. That's the moment healing begins. Not when they leave, but when you realize you were never truly seen, only studied, mirrored, manipulated, until you became a reflection of what they needed, not who you are. And now that the mirror's cracked, you're left with the shard, and the task of rebuilding, not just your life, but your identity, without their influence, without their approval, without their version of you shaping your worth. That's the real work, and it's lonely, but it's also sacred, because every step away from them is a step toward yourself. And that version of you, the one who survived, who's still standing, is more real than anything they ever pretended to offer. That version doesn't need to perform, doesn't need to chase, doesn't need to bleed, to feel loved. That version is enough, always was. There's no closure with a narcissist, not the kind you hope for. No honest conversation, no mutual understanding, no apology that soothes the wounds. And that's what keeps so many people stuck. Not the love, but the lack of explanation, the silence, the unfinished sentence, the confusion left behind like a fog that never lifts. But maybe closure isn't something they can give you. Maybe it's something you choose. When you decide to stop chasing clarity from someone committed to distortion. When you stop analyzing texts, replaying moments, wondering if they ever care. Because the truth is, they didn't need to love you to want to keep you. They just needed you to be confused enough to stay. That's why the cycle felt endless. That's why the highs were so addictive. Because they were followed by cold withdrawal. And in that withdrawal, You blamed yourself, not them. That was the trap, and escaping it doesn't mean you never feel pain again. It means you start feeling your pain, not theirs. It means you stop defending someone who never defended you. It means you stop explaining your needs to someone who weaponized your voice. That's what healing looks like. Not always loud, sometimes just quiet. Choosing silence over reaction. Choosing distance over begging. Choosing truth over fantasy. You didn't lose them. You lost the illusion, the dream you were sold, the hope you clung to, the version of yourself that thought love meant suffering. And now you begin again, with yourself, with gentleness, with truth. You rebuild, not to prove your worth, but because your worth never needed proving. You survived, you woke up, and that's not weakness, that's power. Real, unshakable, irreversible power, the kind they'll never understand, because it was never theirs to begin with.